Okay, now it's time for Phantom Toll Booth. So what you need to have out right now is you need to have your vocabulary notebook. Open it up to, we're still continuing on our group of 3. So find the chapter 11 vocabulary, draw a line underneath it, and then write the title of these notes, the Phantom Toll Booth. Remember, we underline the titles of major works. Go ahead and write the date, March 24th, 2020. And then we are on chapter 12, which is called The Silent Valley. Remember how we put the titles of minor works or chapter titles in quotations. Okay, we have 5 words for this chapter, and we are on number 10. So number 10 is the word flourish. Flourish is a verb, and it means to be successful or to prosper, to do very well. So if you wanted to use that in a sentence, you have to use the verb form. So you can make it past, present, or future, and you could say something like, she flourished in her distance learning, which means you did very well. Hopefully you all do. Number 11 is the word abolish. Remember, if I'm going too fast, make sure you can pause it and then start it up when you're ready. Abolish is another verb, and it means to do away with, to make it go away, or put an end to. So in context, Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery. He got rid of it. That would be using the word in its verb form in the past tense. Number 12 is the word crestfallen. Crestfallen is an adjective, and it means dejected or sad. If you are crestfallen, you are sad kind of in an upset way. You could be crestfallen that we can't come to school until April 13th. Okay, number 13 is disconsolate. Disconsolate. Disconsolate is another adjective, and it means hopelessly unhappy, or again, dejected. So you might be disconsolate. I am disconsolate that you guys are not here with me in the classroom. And number 14, we have consensus. And consensus is a noun. Consensus is an opinion shared by the majority of a group. So in context, we could say Americans are in consensus that we are sad to have to stay home, but it is needed. Okay, so now what you need to do is make sure you have all of those written in your notebook, and then go ahead and put it away. Get out your Phantom Toll Booth book, and get ready to read along with me. Okay, so now you should have your Phantom Toll Booth out. Everything else should be put away. Even though you're at home, try to get in your good listening position where your back is all the way back, your body's up straight. Try to have as little distractions in front of you as possible. And go ahead and open your book. If you have my book, we are on page 144. If you have the other book, just make sure you're on chapter 12. And make sure that you're reading along with me. Be listening for those, be listening and looking for those vocabulary words. Okay. Chapter 12, The Silent Valley. How agreeable and pleasant this valley is, thought Milo, as once again they bounced along the highway with the humbug humming snatches of old songs, to his own vast amusement, and Talk sniffing contentedly at the wind. I really can't see what Dr. Discord was so concerned about. There certainly couldn't be anything unpleasant along this road. And just as the thought crossed his mind, they passed through a heavy stone gateway, and everything was very different. At first, it was difficult to tell just what had changed. It all looked the same, and it all smelled the same, but for some reason, nothing sounded the same. I wonder what's happened, said Milo. At least that's what he tried to say, for although his lips moved, not a sound came from his mouth. And suddenly, he realized what it was. For Talk was no longer ticking, and Humbug, although happily singing, was doing so in complete silence. The wind no longer rustled the leaves, the car no longer squeaked, and the insects no longer buzzed in the fields. Not the slightest thing could be heard, and it felt as if in some mysterious way a switch had been thrown and all the sound in the world had been turned off at the same instant. The humbug, suddenly realizing what had happened, leapt to his feet in terror, and Talk worriedly checked to see if he was still keeping time. It was certainly a strange feeling to know that no matter how loudly or softly you chatted or rattled or bumped, it all came out the same way, as nothing. How dreadful, thought Milo as he slowed down the car. The three of them began to talk and shout at once with absolutely no result until, hardly noticing where they were going, they had driven into the midst of a large crowd of people marching along the road. Some of them were singing at the tops of their non-existent voices, and the others were carrying large signs which proclaimed, "Down with silence! All quiet is no diet. It's laudable to be audible. More sound for all." And one enormous banner stated simply, "Hear, hear." Except for these and the big brass cannon being pulled along behind, they all looked very much like the residents of any other small valley to which you've never been. When the car had stopped, one of them held up a placard which said, "Welcome to the Valley of Sound." And the others cheered as loudly as possible, which was not very loud at all. "Have you come to help us?" asked another, stepping forward with his question. "Please," added a third. Milo tried desperately to say who he was and where he was going, but to no avail. As he did, 4 more placards announced, look carefully, and we'll tell you of our terrible misfortune." And while 2 of them held up a large blackboard, a third, writing as fast as he could, explained why there was nothing but quiet in the Valley of Sound. "At a place in the valley not far from here," he began, "where the echoes used to gather and the winds came to rest, there is a great stone fortress, and in it lives the Soundkeeper who rules this land. When the old King of Wisdom drove the demons into the distant mountains, he appointed her guardian of all sounds and noises, past, present, and future. For years she ruled as a wise and beloved monarch, each morning at sunrise releasing the day's new sounds, to be borne by the winds through the kingdom, and each night at moonset gathering in the old sounds to be catalogued and filed in the vast storage vaults below. The writer paused for a moment to mop his brow, and then, since the blackboard was full, erased it completely and continued anew from the top. She was generous to a fault and provided us with all the sound we could possibly use, for singing as we worked, for bubbling pots of stew, for the chop of an axe and the crash of a tree, for the creak of a hinge and the hoot of an owl, for the squish of a shoe in the mud and the friendly tapping of rain on the roof, and for the sweet music of pipes and the sharp snap of winter ice cracking in the ground. He paused again as a tear of longing rolled from cheek to lip with the sweet, salty taste of an old memory. And these sounds, when once used, would be carefully placed in alphabetical order and neatly kept for future reference. Everyone lived in peace, and the valley flourished as the happy home of sound. But then things began to change. Slowly at first, and then in a rush, more people came to settle here and brought with them new ways and new sounds, some very beautiful and some less so. But everyone was so busy with the things that had to be done that they scarcely had time to listen at all. And as you know, a sound which is not heard disappears forever and is not to be found again. People laughed less and grumbled more, sang less and shouted more, and the sounds they made grew louder and uglier. It became difficult to hear even the birds of the breeze, and soon everyone stopped listening for them. He again cleared the blackboard as the humbug choked back a sob and continued writing. The soundkeeper grew worried and disconsolate. Each day there were fewer sounds to be collected, and most of those were hardly worth keeping. Many people thought it was the weather, and others blamed the moon, but the general consensus of opinion held that the trouble began at the time that rhyme and reason were banished. But no matter what the cause, no one knew what to do. Then one day, Dr. Discord appeared in the valley with his wagon of medicines and the bluish smoggy din. He made a thorough examination and promised to cure everyone of everything, and the soundkeeper let him try. He gave several bad-tasting spoonfuls of medicine to every adult and child, and it worked, but not really as expected, for he cured everybody of everything but noise. The soundkeeper became furious. She chased him from the valley forever and then issued the following decree. From this day forward, the Valley of Sound shall be silent. Since sound is no longer appreciated, I hereby abolish it. Please return all unused amounts to the fortress immediately. And that's the way it's been ever since, he concluded sadly. There is nothing we can do to change it, and each day new hardships are reported. A small man with his arms full of letters and messages pushed through the crowd and offered them to Milo. Milo took one which read, Dear Soundkeeper, we had a thunderstorm last week and the thunder still hasn't arrived. How long should we wait? Yours truly, a friend. Then he took a telegram which stated, Band concert great success. Stop. When may we expect the music? Stop. Now you see, continued the writer, why you must help us attack the fortress and free sound. What can I do? Wrote Milo. You must visit the soundkeeper and bring from the fortress one sound, no matter how small, with which to load our cannon. For if we can reach the walls with the slightest noise, they will collapse and free the rest. It won't be easy, for she is hard to deceive, but you must try. Milo thought for just a moment, and then, with a resolute, I shall, volunteered to go. Within a few minutes, he stood bravely at the fortress door. Knock, knock, he wrote neatly on a piece of paper, which he pushed under the crack. In a moment, the great portal swung open, and as it closed behind him, a gentle voice rang out. Right this way, I'm in the parlor. Can I talk now? Cried Milo happily, hearing his voice once again. Yes, but only in here, she replied softly. Now do come into the parlor. Milo walked slowly down the long hallway and into the little room where the soundkeeper sat listening intently to an enormous radio set, whose switches, dials, knobs, meters, and speaker covered one whole wall, and which at the moment was playing nothing. Isn't that lovely? She sighed. It's my favorite program, 15 minutes of silence, and after that there's a half hour of quiet, and then an interlude of lull. Why, did you know that there are almost as many kinds of stillness as there are sounds? But sadly enough, no one pays any attention to them these days. Have you ever heard the wonderful silence just before the dawn, she inquired, or the quiet and calm just as a storm ends? Or perhaps you know the silence when you haven't the answer to a question you've been asked, or the hush of a country road at night, or the expectant pause in a room full of people when someone is just about to speak. Or, most beautiful at all, the moment after the door closes and you're all alone in the whole house. Each one is different, you know, and all very beautiful if you listen carefully. As she spoke, the thousands of little bells and chimes which covered her from head to toe tinkled softly, and as if in reply, the telephone began to ring too. For someone who loves silence, she certainly talks a great deal, thought Milo. At one time, I was able to listen to any sound made at any place at any time, the soundkeeper remarked, pointing towards the radio wall. But now I merely... Pardon me, interrupted Milo as the phone continued to ring, but aren't you going to answer it? Oh, no, not in the middle of the program, she replied, and turned the silence up a little louder. But it may be important, insisted Milo. Not at all, she assured him. It's only me. It gets so lonely around here with no sounds to distribute or collect that I call myself 7 or 8 times a day just to see how I am. How are you? He asked politely. Not very well, I'm afraid. I seem to have a touch of static, she complained. But what brings you here? Of course, you've come to tour the vaults. Well, they're usually open to the public only on Mondays from 2 to 4, but since you've traveled so far, we'll have to make an exception. Follow me, please. She quickly bounced to her feet with a chorus of jingles and chimes and started down the hallway. Don't you just love jingles and chimes? I do, she answered quickly. Besides, they're very convenient, for I'm always getting lost in this big fortress, and all I have to do is listen for them, and then I know exactly where I am. They entered a tiny cage-like elevator and traveled down for fully 3/4 of a minute, stopping finally in an immense vault, whose long lines of file drawers and storage bins stretched in all directions from where here began to where there ended and from floor to ceiling. Every sound that's ever been made in history is kept here, said the soundkeeper, skipping down one of the corridors with Milo in hand. For instance, look here. She opened one of the drawers and pulled out a small brown envelope. This is the exact tune George Washington whistled when he crossed the Delaware on that icy night in 1777. Milo peered into the envelope, and sure enough, that's exactly what was in it. But why do you collect them all? He asked as she closed the drawer. If we didn't collect them, said the soundkeeper as they continued to stroll through the vault, the air would be full of old sounds and noises bouncing around and bumping into things. It would be terribly confusing, because you'd never know whether you were listening to an old one or a new one. Besides, I do like to collect things, and there are more sounds than almost anything else. Why, I have everything here from the buzz of a mosquito 1,000,000 years ago to what your mother said to you this morning. And if you come back here in 2 days, I'll tell you what she said tomorrow. It's really very simple. Let me show you. Say a word, any word. Hello, said Milo, for that was all he could think of. Now, where do you think it went? She asked with a smile. I don't know, said Milo, shrugging his shoulders. I always thought that most people do, she hummed, peering down one of the corridors. Now, let me see. First, we find the cabinet with today's sounds. Ah, here it is. Then we look under G for greetings, then under M for Milo, and here it is already in its envelope. So you see, the whole system is quite automatic. It's a shame we hardly use it anymore. That's wonderful, gasped Milo. May I have one little sound as a souvenir? Certainly, she said with pride, and then, immediately thinking better of it, added, not. And don't try to take one because it's strictly against the rules. Milo was crestfallen. He had no idea how to steal a sound, even the smallest one, for the soundkeeper always had at least one eye carefully focused on him. Now, for a look at the workshop, she cried, whisking him through another door and into a large abandoned laboratory full of old pieces of equipment, all untended and rusting. This is where we used to invent sound, she said wistfully. Do they have to be invented? Asked Milo, who seemed surprised at almost everything she told him. I thought they just were. No one realizes how much trouble we go through to make them, she complained. Why, at one time, this shop was crowded and busy from morning to night. But how do you invent a sound? Milo inquired. Oh, that's very easy, she said. First, you must decide exactly what the sound looks like, for each sound has its own exact shape and size. Then you make some of them here in the shop and grind each one 3 times into an invisible powder and throw a little of each into the air every time you need it. But I've never seen a sound, Milo insisted. You never see them out there, she said, waving her arm in the general direction of everywhere, except every once in a while on a very cold morning when they freeze. But in here we see them all the time. Here, let me show you. She picked up a padded stick and struck a nearby bass drum 6 times. 6 large, woolly, puffy, fluffy cotton balls, each about 2 feet across, rolled silently out onto the floor. You see, she said, putting some of them in a large grinder. Now listen. And she took a pinch of the invisible powder and threw it into the air with a boom, 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 boom. Do you know what a hand clap looks like? Milo shook his head. Try it, she commanded. He clapped his hands once, and a single sheet of clean white paper fluttered to the floor. He tried it 3 more times, and 3 more sheets of paper did the very same thing. And then he applauded as fast as he could, and a great cascade of papers filled the air. Isn't that simple? And it's the same for all sounds. If you think about it, you'll soon know what each one looks like. Take laughter, for instance, she said, laughing brightly, and 1,000 tiny brightly colored bubbles flew into the air and popped noiselessly. Or speech, she continued. Some of it is light and airy, some sharp and pointed, but most of it, I'm afraid, is just heavy and dull. How about music? Asked Milo excitedly. Right over here. We weave it on our looms. Symphonies are the large, beautiful carpets with all the rhythms and melodies woven in. Concertos are these tapestries, and all the other bolts of cloth are serenades, waltzes, overtures, and rhapsodies. And we also have some of the songs that you often sing, she cried, holding up a handful of brightly colored handkerchiefs. She stopped for a moment and said sadly, We even had one section over there that did nothing but put the sound of the ocean into seashells. This was once such a happy place. Then why don't you make sound for everyone now? He shouted so eagerly that the soundkeeper leapt back in surprise. Don't shout so, young man. If there's one thing we need more of around here, it's less noise. Now come with me and I'll tell you all about it. And put that down immediately. Her last remark was directed towards Milo's efforts to stuff one of the large drum beats into his back pocket. They returned quickly to the parlor, and when the soundkeeper had settled herself in a chair and carefully tuned the radio to a special hour of hush, Milo asked his question once again in a somewhat lower voice. It doesn't make me happy to hold back the sound, she began softly, for if we listen to them carefully, they can sometimes tell us things far better than words. But if that is so, asked Milo, and he had no doubt that it was, shouldn't you release them? Never, she cried. They just use them to make horrible noises which are ugly to see and worse to hear. I leave all that to Dr. Discord and that awful, awful din. But some noises are good sounds, aren't they? He insisted. That may be true, she replied stubbornly, but if they won't make the sounds that I like, they won't make any. But, he started to say, and it got no further than that, for while he was about to say that he didn't think that was quite fair, a thought to which the obstinate soundkeeper might not have taken kindly, he suddenly discovered the way he would carry his little sound from the fortress. In the instance between saying the word and before it sailed off into the air, he clamped his lips shut, and the butt was trapped in his mouth, all made but not spoken. Well, I mustn't keep you all day, she said impatiently. Now turn your pockets out so that I can see that you didn't steal anything, and you can be on your way. When he had satisfied the soundkeeper, he nodded his farewell, for it would have been most impractical to say thank you or good afternoon, and raced out the door. Okay, now that we've finished chapter 12, go ahead and get out your reading journal. Open to a new clean page. Remember, you're in your reading journal. Make sure you're not in your vocabulary notebook or your English notebook. Make sure you're in your reading journal or your reading log. Open to the first clean page. Write the title of the book, the chapter, and today's date. And then here are the questions. Remember, if I'm going too fast, pause it, and then or watch it again or whatever you need to do. Number 1. What happens when Milo and his friends pass through the stone gateway? How would you react? So first you need to tell me what happens. Then you need to say how you would react if the same thing happened to you. Number 2. When Milo, Talk, and the Humbug reach the Valley of Sound, what do the people ask them to do? Number 3. Compare and contrast Dr. Discord and the Soundkeeper. Number 4. Why do the people in the Valley of Sound say the Soundkeeper abolished sound? So this is why the people, the citizens of the valley, not why the Soundkeeper abolished it, why she says she abolished it, but why the people say that she abolished it. Number 5. Describe the Valley of Sound before and after rhyme and reason were banished. So that means, what was the Valley of Sound like before they were banished, and what was it like after? Number 6, this is a long one. Remember, you only have to write the part that's underlined with red, but the rest of it helps you to understand what the question is asking. In the Valley of Sound, each sound looks different. A hand clap looks like a clean white paper. Laughter looks like colorful bubbles. Remember, they also had the drum beats that looked like big puffy clouds. Draw and describe how you imagine the sound of birds chirping and the sound of horns honking. Don't use an example that they used in the book. You need to come up with your own drawing. Remember, you're describing in words, and then you're drawing a picture of what birds chirping would look like and what horns honking would look like. Okay, so describe it in words, then draw a picture. And number 7, compare and contrast the story of reality and illusions with the story of the Valley of Sound. So remember, compare and contrast means, how is the story of reality and illusion similar to the story of the Valley of Sounds? And contrast means, how is it different? Okay? Remember, you're answering at least 3 questions. Each answer should have at least 2 complete sentences. If you finish answering those 3 questions before 20 minutes is up, go ahead and answer another question. If you want to answer more, go right ahead. Once you're done with this, and I will zoom in on these in just a minute, but once you're done with this, we are at the end of our group of 3 chapters, so you do have homework. So you're going to open your packet for Tuesday, March 24th, and that first page is your homework. On the front is vocabulary, and on the back is the comprehension. It's the vocabulary and comprehension, just like we've always done. Remember, you have to do it all, except you only have to do one a little extra. If you do both, you will get extra points, but you only have to do one. Remember, so the first part you're matching just like normal with vocabulary, then you're filling in the blank. Then you have a little extra. Remember, a little extras, they need to have 1 to 3 sentences, well, really 2 to 3 sentences for the answer. Then you have multiple choice. Short answer, you need 1 to 3 sentences. Long answer, you need 3 to 5 sentences. And then the little extra, depending on which one, they need 2 to 3. So a little extra is like short answer. 2 to 3 sentences. Long answer, 3 to 5 sentences. Make sure you fully answer the questions. Okay, I'm going to zoom in on the questions and then go ahead.